He's known as the father of modern Chinese painting and the modern Chinese painting sage. He excelled at oil painting, traditional Chinese painting, sketch, calligraphy, and poetry. Many of his works are praised as epic masterpieces. He was the most internationally influential Chinese artist of the 20th century. He was also an art educator. The Western realism he advocated is still influencing Chinese artists. Some critics say there has been no leader like him in Chinese art circles since his death. His name is Beihong.
On October 30th, 2011, Denver had its first snow of the year. That same day, Beihong, pioneer of modern Chinese painting exhibition, opened at the Denver Art Museum. The handsome galloping horses and the freehand ink wash paintings convey the charm of traditional Chinese painting. The lifelike sketches and portraits show the painter's Western painting skills. Visitors to the exhibition marvel at this masterpiece.
他开启了中国现代现实主义美术的一个先河，他是一个开宗立派的大人物，他在中国美术史上一定会有非常重的一页，他影响中国的美术的后代。
He goes to the West and he sees all these interesting things in the West happening, and goes back to China and just fuses everything together. And that is wonderful to see, and I think that makes him a very important artist of the 20th century.
Qing, in the southern part of China, is a city famous for its pottery. The Tonghua River runs through it. Beihong was born in this traditional courtyard-style house by the river in 1895. This style of building is characteristic of southern China architecture. The inside of the house still remains in its original form. This attic used to be Beihong's study in his childhood. His first teacher was his father, Dajong.
我祖父呢，徐大章会画画，也是私塾教私塾的，一面教私塾，一面画画，一面种2亩瓜田。
在当时，可以说是我们宜兴也是一流的一个乡村画家。
在旧社会里，画家不像现在，这是穷画家。
Influenced by his father, Beihong developed an interest in painting and showed great talent even as a boy. Dajong's child learning under a pine tree shows that Beihong's father had a profound influence on him.
徐悲鸿是一个涉猎的面非常广、画外功夫极为深厚的一个大师。他受到中国的传统教育，也应该讲是很系统的。
因为他小时候有国学的启蒙，有他父亲的教导，有中国画的根基。
Only a few of the works Beihong painted early in his life have survived. The subjects of Jing Jiang and Go Jian's wife are kindness, righteousness, courteousness, wisdom, and faith, all valued by traditional Chinese culture. When he was 13 years old, he and his father left their hometown to build a new life elsewhere. They walked along the streets and kept each other company. In those unsettled years, for the first time, the young Beihong saw the complicated outside world.
就是沿途漫画嘛，那时候家里穷，没办法了， 我祖父就带着我父亲，就在街上帮人家画画。
Xu Beihong developed an interest in the traditional Chinese art under the influence of his father. He also picked up Western painting that was spread among ordinary people. At the time, he had already gained some fame. 3 years later, his father fell seriously ill, and they had to return to their hometown. The burden of the whole family fell on the shoulders of 17-year-old Xu Beihong. To earn more money, he taught painting in 3 different schools in Yiqing. Every day he set out at daybreak, and because all 3 schools were more than 25 kilometers apart, he became a very fast and efficient walker. His father died the following year. Xu Beihong decided to try his luck in the outside world. In the early 20th century, Shanghai was a dazzling city, full of scenes of decadence. But this had nothing to do with Xu Beihong, who was from the countryside. After spending his last copper coin, the currency of this period, matters got even worse when a long-awaited job opportunity fell through, and he was at the end of his rope. It was then that good fortune came his way. The man in this portrait is Huang Zhenju. He was a rich merchant in Shanghai. He stumbled upon Xu Beihong's paintings and decided this young man was a rare talent. With his help, Xu Beihong lived a stable life. He finally didn't need to worry about his livelihood and could concentrate on painting and calligraphy. To express his gratitude to Huang Zhenju, Xu Beihong renamed himself Huang Fu, which means getting support from Huang. 1 year later, in the cold winter, Huang was on the edge of bankruptcy because his business was failing and could no longer support Xu. Driven to the wall, Xu Beihong drew a painting of horses and submitted it to the Shanghai Aesthetic Bookstore, hoping for it to be published.
当时主持上海审美馆的是高奇峰、高剑父，岭南派的2个大画家。接到那个投稿以后，给他一个评价，他们也是伯乐呀。他们里面说：“虽古之韩干，未能过也。”就你现在给我们寄来这匹马，就是拿中国历史上最有名的画家、画马的名家韩干来比，他都比不过你这匹马画的呀。
The Gao brothers decided to publish Xu Beihong's painting. They also offered him a generous contribution fee and asked him to paint 4 portraits of ladies. Xu Beihong was overjoyed and at the same time overwhelmed because he had only 1 week to finish 4 paintings with only 5 copper coins. Having no other choice, he pawned his cotton-padded jacket and with the money he received, purchased pigment and paper. Every day he alleviated his hunger with 1 piece of glutinous rice cake, which cost 1 copper coin. He was so hungry that he almost fainted several times. These are portraits of ladies Xu Beihong painted more than 2 decades later. They look serene and calm. It's hard to imagine the terrible situation Xu Beihong was in when he painted the portraits of ladies for the Gao brothers. As Xu Beihong was struggling to make a living, he received a university admission notice. This 21-year-old young man, who'd never received a formal education, was admitted into the French language department of the prestigious Aurora University in Shanghai. He had gone to Shanghai solely to realize his dream of painting. But why then did he apply for the French language department instead of a painting school? When Xu Beihong roamed the streets to sell paintings, he saw some examples of Western art. He also copied paintings of people and animals on snuff boxes. At the time, he had the idea of going to Western countries to learn painting. After arriving in Shanghai, he began to understand that he could only learn the authentic Western painting in France, so he planned to learn French in his spare time. This oil painting was created in 1924. The lady in it was called Jiang Biwei. At Aurora University, Xu got to know Professor Jiang Mei-sheng. Jiang appreciated his artistic talent and often invited him to his home. Xu Beihong caught the attention of Jiang Biwei, the second daughter of Jiang Mei-sheng. She was 18 years old at the time.
我妈妈那个时候爱上我父亲，那么那个时候我外祖父帮助我父亲，我父亲有一段时间也坐在我外祖父那边。我妈妈看到我父亲长得帅，觉得就对我父亲好。
The Jiang family was prestigious in Yiqing. Jiang Biwei's parents were very strict with her. Though she adored Xu Beihong, she dared not to express her love. They often met each other, but they never talked to each other in private. Even when the two of them were left alone, they would try to avoid conversation. The subtle feeling she felt for him made the teenage girl both excited and worried, because her parents had already betrothed her to another young man when she was 13 years old, and the wedding day was approaching. One day, Jiang Biwei suddenly received a letter from Xu Beihong. He wrote that through selling his paintings, he saved up enough money for his studies in France, and he would be leaving soon.
我父亲他说那么哪一天你到哪条路哪个门口等我母亲说好，我到时候我到那里去。当时身上没有钱，就把家里的那个什么东西拿到当铺里去当了一天去，就他们就跟我父亲就头发了。
In ancient China, marriages were arranged according to parents' wishes and a matchmaker's advice. This tradition lasted several thousand years. In fact, it was not broken until about 60 years ago. 100 years ago, it took a lot of courage for a young couple in love to refuse arranged marriages to other people and to run away together. In the early morning of May 14, 1917, Xu Beihong put a crystal ring carved with the two characters Bi Wei onto the finger of Jiang Biwei. Then they boarded a ship and left Shanghai.
In 1917, World War I was raging in Europe. With the spread of the flames of war, by May, the travel from Shanghai to Europe was completely disrupted. So Xu Beihong and Jiang Biwei changed their plans and went to Japan. They stayed in Japan for 6 months until they ran out of money, and Xu Beihong's first overseas study came to an end. After returning to China, he decided to visit a man. This is a watercolor painting drawn using Western realistic painting techniques. A family is seen enjoying themselves in a traditional Chinese garden. Interestingly, this boy is wearing Western-style clothes. This amiable man was Kong Youwei.
康有为是什么人物？他就是清末变法的人物，带头人物，关注社会，关注民生，关注国体，关注国运，这是一个传统，这是一个时代的潮流。
There was an indissoluble bond between the young Xu Beihong and the famous Kong Youwei. When he was in university, his school often invited celebrities to give lectures. Xu Beihong first heard about the idea of reforming traditional Chinese painting in Kong Youwei's lecture. Kong thought that Chinese painting had deteriorated. It stuck to the old traditions and lacked innovation. He advocated learning from Western realism and combining it with Chinese painting techniques. Xu Beihong was deeply attracted by Kong's idea, and his realist paintings were appreciated by Kong. Kong showed Xu all the calligraphy works and paintings he had collected, and also asked Xu to draw a painting of his family. 1 month later, Xu Beihong went to Beijing with a letter of recommendation from Kong Youwei. Xu Beihong traveled to Beijing to seek an opportunity to study abroad. Recommended by Kong Youwei, he soon got the promise of sending him to study abroad with government funding. He was also recommended to work as a tutor in the Painting Methods Research Society at Peking University. Here, he displayed his outstanding talents. In the paper, Methods to Reform Chinese Painting, Xu Beihong wrote that we should protect the good traditions, inherit the ones on the verge of extinction, reform the defective ones, and remedy the deficiencies. We should also learn from Western painting and fuse it together with the Chinese painting.
的意思就是说，老祖宗留下的好的东西，我们继承它，守之坚守。垂绝者要衰亡的东西，我们来继之，把它重新继承起来。啊，不足者增之，来增加它。不好的东西，我们来改变它，重新创新。哎，东西方的东西可以采纳的东西，我们兼容之。
所以他到西方去，他很明确，中国艺术什么是好的。 为什么要衰败到那些程度？他去要干什么？他是要学点东西来振兴中国的艺术。
On May 10th, 1919, after nearly 2 months at sea, Xu Beihong and Jiang Biwei finally reached Paris and started their 8-year-long study in this world-famous city of arts. The Louvre was the palace of art museums that Xu yearned to visit the most. Every time he came here, he was reluctant to leave. By then, Europe had gone through the transitional period from Classicism to Impressionism to Modernism. Expressionism was prevalent. Fauvism, represented by Henri Matisse, was a leading artistic trend. Determined to absorb the essence of the Western fine arts to reform Chinese painting, Xu Beihong didn't follow that trend. Instead, he searched for answers in the works of classical masters.
他就是要贯彻他的一个理想，这个理想就是好的画一定是写实的。 哎，不是写实的都是歪门邪道。
In the Louvre, Xu Beihong marveled at the works of the neoclassic masters. He was enchanted by the revolutionary romanticism shown in those works, and was deeply impressed by the epic and grand scenes and the realistic styles of those works. What he wanted to learn was this type of electrifying and inspiring fine art.
当时的中国是那么一个历史背景，国家灾难频频。虽然抗日战争还没有爆发，但是军阀混战，中国的这个走什么路，政治上走什么路，国家走什么路，艺术走什么路，是摆在每一个关注人生、关注社会的艺术家必须思考的问题。
他不是为了去到西方成为一个西方画家，到西方去混，不是要接受西方的全盘的接受西方的审美标准，他是要创造出中国的一种新的复兴起来的艺术。
最主要的还是表他是关心民族的灾难、民族的疾苦，他是以这个为他的终身所奋斗的目标。
Rue Bonaparte, on the left bank of the Seine in Paris, has many galleries. In fact, it's known as the Gallery Street. Today, the École Nationale Supérieure des Beaux-Arts de Paris looks just like it did a century ago. Every corner of the antique and elegant campus is full of art. Entering the classrooms, you'll find that different from the traditional fine arts education with an emphasis on realism 1 century ago, nowadays, its students prefer modern style. In the oil painting classroom, almost all the paintings drawn by senior students are in modern styles. On the other side of the world, the China Central Academy of Fine Arts in Beijing still practices the same teaching methods used by the École Nationale Supérieure des Beaux-Arts de Paris a century ago. Figure drawing is a required course of all students. It was Xu Beihong, the first director of this academy, who introduced sketching to China. As a student, Xu Beihong was so consumed with painting that he forgot all about eating and sleeping. Relying on his artistic gift and meticulousness, he quickly finished his plaster model sketching and figure drawing courses. These sketches show his excellent basic skills. These images look accurate and are true to life. Though they are just his classroom work, the artistic skills he used when painting them were flawless.
他在法国那个时候，他很努力，这一天这要当好一天用的，不像一个模特儿，人家这就画一个他就得了，他画好几个，正面一个，侧面一个，背面一个，画了好几个。
他素描最好，到现在为止，世界任何个人搞艺术、搞素描的，画不出来。
After finishing the basic courses, Xu Beihong studied oil painting with François Flameng, who excelled at portrait painting. Later, he asked Pascal Danan Bovary, who was known as the last French master of the realist school, to be his teacher. Danan Bovary would become an important instructor in Xu's art career.
达仰是位伟大的画家，是位法国人人都知道的。为什么？他掌握了油画这个西方一个很伟大的画种，他的那个精湛的技巧，从画布的制作到你的每一步的步骤使用，你画出来的画能不能够经得起岁月的考验？
At the age of 17, Danan Bovary began to learn from famous landscape painter Jean-Baptiste Camille Corot. He abided by Corot's teachings of being sincere, confident, and never giving up truth his whole life. Xu Beihong respected Danan Bovary very much and went to his studio every weekend. His painting skills greatly improved. To be sincere, confident, and never giving up truth became his motto. In Xu Beihong's mind, the core of realism was truth. Paintings without an accurate image could not express feelings. One cannot paint an accurate image without careful observation of life. Therefore, he took every opportunity to observe life and draw from nature. These are paintings he created while he studied in France. They depict fragments of his life with Qing Dynasty, such as playing violin, reading, playing with the cat, and napping. The life depicted in these paintings is romantic and comfortable, but in reality, their life was very difficult. Though Xu Beihong was funded by the government, both he and Jiang lived on his allowance. China was in turmoil. Sometimes he couldn't get his allowance. In 1925, his allowance was completely cut off. During that period, they had to borrow money and move to low-cost countries in order to survive. In Paris, Xu Beihong and Jiang Biwei lived in an attic like this. Once they spent 2 months' allowance to repair a skylight broken by hail. Luckily, they pulled through with the support of their friends. Now when people appreciate these elegant paintings, they can hardly imagine that Xu Beihong painted them on an empty stomach in the Louvre. Due to the long-term hunger, Xu Beihong developed chronic stomach and digestive system illnesses. But even with them, it seemed that all his hard work was paying off. In 1923, his painting, Old Woman, was exhibited in the Salon des Artistes Français. In 1924, Sound of the Flute, Housekeeper and His Horse won acclaim in the French art world. In 1927, 9 of his works were selected for exhibition in the Salon des Artistes Français. This was unprecedented in European art history.
徐悲鸿把西方油画这个画种子最基本的东西拿来了，就是它的造型和色彩。这个体系，他基本拿到了，应该说是这样。所以他对中国的油画教育起了十分重要的作用。
After coming back to China, Xu Beihong drew a self-portrait. He still looked unyielding and serious, but the expression on his face was calmer. He was 33 years old that year.
This oil painting, titled "The Foolish Old Man Who Removed the Mountains," is one of Xu Beihong's major works. It depicts an ancient Chinese fable. There were 2 mountains in front of the foolish old man's house, preventing his family from leaving. So he decided to level them. Some people thought he was foolish and that this was an impossible job. But the foolish old man, who in fact wasn't so foolish at all, said, "When I die, there will be my sons, who will have their sons and grandsons. Those grandsons will have their sons and grandsons, and so on to infinity. Why is it impossible to level the mountains?" The story goes that God was so moved by the foolish old man's words that he leveled the mountains for him. The painting was completed in 1940, during what in China is called the Chinese People's War of Resistance against Japanese aggression. It's full of heroism. Through this picture, Xu Beihong expressed the Chinese people's unyielding spirit and perseverance. Xu Beihong studied in the West in order to bring change to Chinese paintings. After he finished his studies abroad and returned to China, he turned the brush in his hand into a weapon so that he could do his part to save the Chinese nation and its people.
Many cultural celebrities once lived in these Western-style buildings. Xu Beihong and Jiang Biwei moved here on October 27, 1927. After 8 bitter years with Xu, Jiang was very satisfied with the comfortable environment here. Previously, the National Central University in Nanjing had invited Xu Beihong to be a professor of its arts department, and his salary was $300 silver a month.
那个时候，一个人吃饭伙食钱1个月最多1块多钱都能吃得很好，所以300块钱的收入，对于我们来说是很富裕的。
After living a stable life for some time, Jiang Biwei began to worry. Every month, Xu Beihong spent about 2 weeks in Nanjing, and when he was in Shanghai, he was often away from home. Xu Beihong went to Nangoa Academy of Arts every day. He worked as the director of its Department of Fine Arts. One founder of the Nangoa Academy of Arts was Tian Han, a left-wing playwright. He'd been acquainted with Xu Beihong for a long time. They shared the same artistic dream and political views, so they became close friends. Tian invited Xu to teach in the academy, not long after Xu returned to China. China was in turmoil at the time. In 1928, the Japanese army committed the Jinan massacre and killed nearly 10,000 Chinese soldiers and civilians. The whole country was in shock. Xu Beihong couldn't hold back his anger and began to create a large oil painting called Tian Hung and His 500 Retainers. Tian Hung was a righteous man of ancient China. When his state was conquered, he had decided that he would rather cut off his head and have it sent to his enemy than surrender. His heroic death saved the lives of his 500 men. This oil painting depicts Tian Hung's farewell to his men.
他干嘛要选这个题材？因为这是中国最重要的精神的代表，就是孟子所说的“富贵不能淫，贫贱不能移，威武不能屈，此之为大丈夫”。他就要画这张画，表现中国人，表示中国的精神，表现中国艺术家的水平。
In the painting, the man in yellow was Xu Beihong. He not only painted himself as one of the retainers, but also included his family members, friends, and students into this painting. While Xu Beihong devoted himself to teaching and painting, fights broke out within his family. Jiang Biwei had long been dissatisfied with his close relationship with left-wingers like Tian Han. When Tian Han was thrown into jail because of his revolutionary activities, and Xu Beihong did everything he could to rescue him, Jiang decided she couldn't stand it anymore.
我父亲就要保护田汉，为了这个事情跟我妈妈吵架。我妈妈说：“你净跟这些危险分子，跟这些穷朋友在一起，他们会影响你的前途。你为什么要保护他们？” 保他们连你自己都保不住。
Jiang Biwei hired a car and came to Nangoa Academy of Arts. She took away all his painting tools and books and forced him to quit his job at the academy. Then they moved to Nanjing. This is Xu Beihong's former residence in Nanjing. The courtyard of this Western-style building used to be lively and was often full of guests. It's said that the cultural salons and celebrity parties held in Xu Beihong's mansion were famous in the upper class in Nanjing. Xu gave this beautiful building a special name, Dangerous Nest, which means they had to be prepared for danger in times of peace. Today's Southeast University in Nanjing is what used to be part of the campus of the National Central University. The art rooms where Xu Beihong taught painting were located here. Except for painting, he devoted most of his time to fine arts education. A large number of accomplished artists once studied in this building.
徐悲鸿从来不是为艺术而艺术，徐悲鸿是个社会活动家，他呢其实主要精力主要用在了美术教育上，而他参加社会活动都是为了他要搞美术教育。
In May 1933, after 6 years, Xu Beihong returned to Paris again. He visited his students and also brought a big gift for Europe, the exhibition of modern Chinese painting. The exhibition was a hit in Europe, and he continued to hold exhibition tours in Belgium, Germany, Britain, Italy, and the Soviet Union, winning high acclaim in all these countries. Major newspapers at the time praised Xu Beihong as the famous professor, painting master, and pioneer who introduced Chinese fine arts to Europe.
Xu Beihong's art actually, in a way, bridged the two cultures. And probably he was the only artist, Chinese artist, that was able to bridge because of his study in Paris of the Western art, the techniques. And then he merged it and then created his own style, which was more comprehensible to the Western audience. So he really was the leading master of that contemporary Chinese art movement. And he infused both culture and created his own.
After returning to China, Xu Beihong fully devoted himself to painting and created many masterpieces that had never been seen in China before. He was a pioneer in the creation of large-scale history painting. In 1931, his large-scale oil painting, Awaiting the Deliverer, once again shocked the painting circles. It depicts enslaved people waiting for a deliverer to rescue them. At the time, he turned his eyes to the toiling masses. Xu Beihong's paintings caused the authorities some alarm due to their explicit and dangerous nature. Some people warned Jiang Biwei that she should stop Xu from drawing these kinds of paintings because they were too explicit, but Xu Beihong ignored the warning.
徐悲鸿他有一个对联嘛，叫“固执己见，一意孤行”嘛。他在艺术上，在政治上，他有自己的非常鲜明的这个立场。
Back then, the lights in Xu Beihong's studio didn't turn off until midnight because he completely devoted himself to painting. Outside his studio, guests regularly filled up the courtyard. There were dance parties that went on all through the night. Jiang Biwei enjoyed it, while Xu Beihong thought it was annoying. Then, like a blasting fuse, one of his paintings triggered the hidden crisis in their marriage. This painting was created by Xu Beihong in 1936. The young lady in it was Sun Duozi, who was born into an eminent family. While she worked as the model of this painting, she could never have expected that she would be the reason for Xu Beihong's marriage crisis. At the age of 19, Sun Duozi entered the arts department of National Central University. Her outstanding talent soon caught the attention of Xu Beihong, who then coached her in painting, showed her his studio, and painted portraits of her. Jiang Biwei saw the painting by accident. Her grievances and anger welled up. She did what she could to stop Xu Beihong from having contact with Sun. She also utilized all her connections to cross Sun's name off the list of students who would be sent abroad at the government's expense. Infuriated, Xu Beihong left Guangxi, and the affection between him and Jiang Biwei came to an end. At the time, the War of Resistance against Japanese aggression broke out. In turmoil, the National Central University was moved to Chongqing. In 1937, in Chongqing, Xu Beihong drew the large Chinese painting, Chongqing People Gathering Water. It depicts the hard life of the people living by the Jialing River. He included himself in this painting. Though he looked like a scholar in the painting, he was also carrying water like the others. The expression in his eyes shows his deep sympathy for the people at the bottom of society.
你会感觉到它一种沉重，一种很沉重的东西，不是光是一种愉悦。
During the War of Resistance against Japanese aggression, Xu Beihong painted Put Down Your Whip, Roaring Lion, The Foolish Old Man Who Removed the Mountains, joined forces in Tokyo, and other encouraging works to promote the resistance against the Japanese aggression. He also held exhibitions in Southeast Asia and India to collect money for China's anti-Japanese war.
In China, Xu Beihong is best known for drawing galloping horses. Chinese art aficionados consider him to be the premier horse painter in modern China.
徐悲鸿呢，用书法的用笔作画，有时候呢，他为了观察马的姿态，他跟在马的背后，跟着马走。那么奔跑呢，它是有一种生生不息、自由奔放这种精神。
Xu Beihong liked horses, and he drew a lot of them throughout his life. This one is one of his most famous paintings. The Chinese army was defeated in the Battle of Changsha in 1941. At that time, Xu was in Malaysia raising money for the war effort. Upon hearing the news, he was filled with worry and finished the galloping horse in just one night. Some scholars say Xu Beihong put all of his passion into this lonely, angry horse galloping into the wilderness. To Xu, it represented the Chinese nation. Through freehand brushwork techniques, he depicted the horse using heavy strokes of ink along with just a few lines. This painting technique was his own original creation.
In 1943, while he was preparing for the founding of the China Academy of Art, Xu Beihong came to Guilin in Guangxi province to recruit librarians, and it was here that he met Liao Jingwen. At the time, 19-year-old Liao Jingwen from Hunan province came to Guangxi as a member of the anti-Japanese chorus. She saw a recruitment ad in the newspaper. She got full marks on the preliminary exam. On the second round exam, she was interviewed and hired by Xu Beihong. In the years to come, they would end up working together. In Liao's mind, Xu was a respectable teacher. She admired him for his struggling course and pursuit for art. She sympathized with him for his difficult and lonely life. Xu Beihong was attracted by this highly intelligent lady. Liao's meticulous care brought joy to the middle-aged Xu.
1946年，我跟北红已经在重庆结婚了。结婚以后，我跟北红一起到北京来，当时是来北平艺专担任校长。
The China Central Academy of Fine Arts in Beijing grew out of the National Beiping Art School. It's the highest educational institution producing fine arts talent in China. Today, they still use the same teaching method created by Xu Beihong. Sketching is the basic course for both oil painting and Chinese painting.
"把西洋方法引进来，形成中国的一个教学体系。这个体系是徐悲鸿创造的，而且很完整，而且是代代相传。有一个非常雄厚的队伍，这个队伍不仅在北京，而且是全国各地变成一个主流。"
On October 1st, 1949, Xu Beihong witnessed the birth of the People's Republic of China in Beiping. 6 months later, on April 1st, 1950, the National Beiping Art School was renamed the China Central Academy of Fine Arts. Xu Beihong was its first director. In his 50s, he became very busy. He went to grassroots units, construction sites, and painted portraits of model workers and soldiers of the volunteer army. His oil painting, Chairman Mao Among the People, was also created in this period of time. When he came to find that his long-lost daughter had participated in the revolution, he was overjoyed.
我从解放军给他写了信，说我到了解放军参军了。呀，我父亲高兴得不得了，见人就说丽丽参加革命了，丽丽参加革命了，高兴得不得了。
Xu Beihong devoted all his passion and energy to the new China's art course. And because he constantly overextended himself, he eventually became ill. On September 23rd, 1953, he suddenly collapsed with a cerebral hemorrhage while he was presiding over a meeting. He was immediately sent to Beijing Hospital for treatment.
北红那么有毅力的人，他挣扎到最后不能活了，他也不闭眼睛。我能够了解他。
3 days later, at 2:52 a.m. on September 26, 1953, at 58 years old, Xu Beihong's heart stopped.
Unfortunately, Xu Beihong only lived for 58 years. Following his wishes, his wife, Liao Jingwen, donated more than 1,200 of his works, as well as more than 1,200 works by other famous painters and calligraphers of the Tang, Sung, Yuan, Ming, and Qing dynasties, as well as modern China that he had collected, and more than 10,000 books, albums of paintings, and stone inscription rubbings to the nation.